Thank you, Haley, and welcome everyone. Today we have TBR's 2022 Device Predictions and Insights webinar based on the previously published special report under that same name. So with that, let's get started. So let me start with a quick introduction for those of you that are new to our devices webinars. I'm Eric Costa, Senior Analyst in TBR's Devices Practice, as well as the primary author and research lead for our Devices Syndicated Coverage, Reports, and Benchmarks. So let's begin by setting the stage for today's topics, what I'm going to cover throughout this webinar. Before I dive into the specific 2022 predictions, I'm going to kind of recap the current state of the device market and where it was and is heading into 2022. When these predictions were published, we had yet to see the 4Q21 results from the device vendors, so I will also touch briefly on any updates there throughout. I will also go over a few high-level device trends that we are seeing in the market. And after that, I'm going to dive into the three predictions for this 2022 year. They revolve around the PC market, tablet market, and the PC services market. And then finally, I will wrap it up with a brief overview on some long-term outlooks as well. And please bear with me if it sounds like I'm starting to lose my voice. I'm just battling a head cold today. So let's get underway with the current state of the device market and where we have been in recent quarters to help provide a better backdrop for the 2022 predictions. Device demand skyrocketed from the pandemic, and lockdowns originally had stayed elevated throughout the past 2 years. We have seen some shift from the consumer to the commercial market over this time period, and all vendors have basically dealt with some sort of struggles in order to meet market demand. But overall, the device ecosystem has and continues to quickly grow and remain in very high demand. Supply is the main issue here, whether it's PCs, tablets, wearables, smartphones, or other devices. Anything that requires a chipset is in short supply. And this is being challenged even outside the device ecosystem, including by products such as automobiles, appliances, gaming consoles, or anything else. Nowadays, almost everything seems to have a chip included, and there's a huge shortage as a result. So the total addressable market, or TAM, has continued to expand since the pandemic began due to the one screen, or now in many cases, more than one screen per person trend. And anyone that can afford a device is getting one. Previously, this was maybe only one device or a couple devices per household. And so we're seeing a big shift there, which is causing total addressable market to become much larger than it was prior to the last couple of years. So the result of this demand and supply differential is backlogs, which remain very high among a variety of device segments. And this is limiting some short-term growth and is going to drive longer-term growth once supply can actually meet demand. And there are also some geopolitical trends and events that are having an impact on the device market, obviously along with the rest of the global economies and markets. And it kind of depends on each event and how it, to what extent it's impacting the device ecosystem. So we have the unfortunate conflict war going on in Ukraine right now. I've talked to multiple of the device vendors, and it doesn't seem at this point that there will be a major impact on device revenue in the coming quarters. However, that's assuming a lot. That as it currently stands, there's no significant impact, it seems, on other countries outside of those two within Europe or elsewhere. I do know some of the vendors are stopping shipments to Russia, but neither of those Ukrainian or Russian markets are significant market share for devices in the big picture on the global scale. And so I don't think it's going to significantly change top-line device revenue. However, should the conflict escalate anymore, then that's going to open up a whole other can of worms. It's going to be a much more severe impact on revenue and unit sales. But for now, we're just going to look at it as it currently stands. So while the revenue impact is not huge, we are still seeing vendors having to deal with operational issues within both of these countries. Many of the vendors have employees and sales teams in both the Ukraine and Russia, often under one unified larger regional team. So having to navigate through those challenges as well as trying to keep everybody safe is kind of where the vendors are focused on there right now. So moving away from that conflict, we could also see other events that have a larger impact on the market. Tensions between China and Taiwan remain very high, with such a large portion of the semiconductor market coming from Taiwan. If something does escalate here, we likely will see another large disruption to the chipset market, and this would directly impact device sales at a much larger rate, and probably throw all these predictions out the window and start over. But so those are all out of the vendors' hands, though. So moving on, we're going to dive into the few predictions we have for 2022. So we start by taking a look at the PC market. My prediction here for 2022 is that PC market growth is unsustainable and is going to return to single-digit growth. So we have been seeing elevated PC revenue and demand over the past 2 years now. First, it was a boom in consumer sales as businesses closed down and everyone outfitted for their in-home lives. A year later, it's the return to offices and the evolving hybrid landscape that's causing a boom in commercial PCs. So we continue to see PC revenue in the double digits to even the 20+% range for most of the vendors. This includes the most recent 4Q21 results for these vendors, with the one exception of Apple here, who saw Mac revenue drop to low single digits. I believe it was 1 or 2% growth, although that wasn't due to demand at all. It was largely supply constraints. The market conditions continue to benefit PC vendors in the short term. Component shortages remain a major roadblock, and this is causing vendors to use the chips they have in higher-end PCs. This is driving premium unit sales, and we're seeing much higher average selling prices as a result. This is not going to be sustainable, I don't think, through the rest of 2022. And I'll start by saying that I was way off on my initial pre-pandemic prediction. As far as I can tell, so was the rest of the market. If you're going back to early 2020, I don't think anyone saw PC growth as strong as it turned out to be so far, and I don't think anyone saw the total addressable market growing to such an extent. But that said, for about the last year, I've been saying the market is going to begin to change around the midpoint of 2022. I still believe that's going to happen, although I think it could be a little later into the second half of 22 now before we start seeing changes in the vendors' results. So component constraints are expected to become less of an issue around this time frame, and this is the largest driver and what my prediction is largely based off of, because as long as we still have severe shortages, we're not going to actually see any significant changes to the market in terms of demand and supply. So assuming these shortages are lessened or resolved, we should see backlogs begin to lower and demand will be able to be met by the vendors. As this happens, we're going to see a shift by vendors in pricing strategies as they compete more on unit price as supply levels increase, and there are a lot more PC options for customers to choose from. Throughout the 2022 year, I expect to see double-digit growth remain in the first half of the year, and then return to more of a single-digit range towards the end of the year. This will likely still keep total 2022 PC revenue growth growing throughout the whole year, but decelerating year to year comparatively to 2021. Heading into the end of 2022 and into 2023, I foresee revenue growth remaining in the single digits, which is where the market largely was pre-pandemic. Due to the beginning of the year and how the growth is continuing right now, I could very well see 2022 annual revenue remain in the lower double digits overall, even though it's going to be decelerating in the single digits later on. And the big difference in the market after this will be that the total addressable market size is not going to change or shrink back at all. We're going to have this new normal, larger TAM. It'll still incrementally continue to grow, but will not. It's not going to be growing at the rate that we've seen over the last few years. So what does this shift in the PC market mean for the different PC segments? Let's start with commercial. We're seeing very high demand and revenue growth from all the PC vendors in the commercial market as businesses outfit hybrid and in-office employee setups in the new business environments. The growth rates have been very high in the 20 to 40% range over the last few quarters per vendor, including the 4Q21 results for all the major PC vendors. I think this is going to continue to be the case in 1Q22, with commercial revenue continuing to drive the overall PC market. It's going to likely also be one of the bigger growth drivers for much of the year, although I do expect growth rates to start to come down in the following quarters, and I'm predicting lower double-digit growth heading into the second half of the year in the commercial PC market. On the other hand, we have the consumer market continuing to fluctuate. We aren't seeing as high of demand here compared to the commercial business, and I also think some of that is the vendors are focusing on high-margin commercial PCs with the available chips that they have, less so on their lower-end consumer portfolio. We are seeing some vendors reporting flat to slowly declining consumer markets in 4Q, with others still seeing low double-digit growth. And the big growth drivers in consumer remains the premium notebooks and the gaming PC market. Both of those continue to see high demand and double-digit revenue growth. I think the lower price consumer offerings are going to pick up later in 2022 after the component shortages become less of a hindrance to supplies, which will drive segment growth, but also average selling prices in that segment. Gaming is going to continue to grow throughout the year and is one of the segments I definitely do not see slowing down much over the next couple of years. I expect that to continue in the solid double-digit growth rate, at least for the next few years. And then in terms of form factors, we have a few different trends that we're seeing. Notebooks continue to be the largest selling PC segment. We're seeing right now a huge uptick in premium brands in very high demand. Many new PCs are coming to market recently that target the hybrid and working environment. A lot of these are Windows 11 PCs. And I see notebook revenue continuing to increase throughout the year, though like I said, I think we'll start to see prices and ASPs start to decline towards the back half of the year. On the desktop side, momentum has continued to rebound the past few quarters, with both revenue and ASPs rising. I see this year-to-year growth continuing for a few more quarters as offices open up. All-in-one desktops as well as traditional towers, both are in high demand with a current focus on premium desktop models as well here. And then workstations are also in high demand, which also signals a lot of the offices are continuing to open in-office operations, and again are looking to refresh their fleets. I saw workstation revenue, I think, as high as 40% this past quarter for some of the vendors. Lastly, I want to touch on what we're seeing with the vendors' inventory levels recently. The inventory levels have been rapidly growing across Dell, Lenovo, HP, and Apple over the last 4 to 5 to 6 quarters, with year-to-year growth rates in the solid double digits. I think, for example, in 4Q21 alone, inventory for Dell was up 73%, HP was up 35%, Lenovo was up 46%. I do need to state that those are corporate inventory levels, not just devices. So for Dell and Lenovo, that's also including data center inventories, and for HP, that would be including printing inventories. So it's not apples to apples, but I do believe that a decent portion of the rise in inventories is related to the devices businesses. In terms of devices inventory, I think a lot of it's components, especially memory. I think what is happening is the vendors are stockpiling whatever components they can. This may continue or even increase more now with the ongoing crisis and kind of the uncertainty there. It's kind of, we'll have to wait and see there. And then but typically as inventory jumps up, it's usually a sign of softening demand. Although obviously this has been happening for a few quarters now, and we're still seeing very strong market demand especially in the consumer markets. So I'm not sure if that's completely the case here. It could foreshadow the coming lower demand that I am predicting later this year, though. So moving on, we're going to switch from PC hardware to the tablet market. And the prediction here is that tablet market revenue growth is going to decelerate in 2022. So in similar fashion to the PC market, the tablet market has also seen demand skyrocket over the last few years. Prior to the pandemic, tablet revenue consistently declined year to year among most of the vendors. When I made this prediction, I thought tablet revenue would continue to grow in 2022, just at a much decelerated rate from the, say, 30 to 40% range that like Apple had been seeing, to even like the triple digits that some of the smaller vendors had been reporting. However, it seems that revenue might even decline now for the year, depending on supply issues and other factors. So I think overall, the tablet revenue and tablet demand is going to drop off to lower levels ahead of the PC market. The tablet total addressable market is much smaller than the PC market. We continue to see users opt for devices with keyboards in this new market environment that we're in. That said, obviously, a lot of the tablets now have attachable keyboards that you can purchase as well, though I do still think PCs are a more attractive choice for many of the buyers. The average life cycle for a tablet is also way longer than a PC. Eventually, the vendor stops rolling out updates to old models, kind of tries to force users into upgrading to get better features and capabilities. But I still know a lot of people that have a 7 or 8 year old tablet or iPad that works perfectly fine for the in-house, around the house kind of usage. So it's more so that I think the life cycle is definitely longer for a consumer tablet than it would be within the commercial market, where something like security is much more important. The tablet also is not benefiting as much from the commercial market growth spurt that we're seeing currently, which is obviously helping out the PC sales a lot. Tablets are used in various businesses and creative workspaces, but overall not nearly as important as the PC there. Tablets have their own core vertical markets, including education, government, healthcare, and I already mentioned the consumer kind of household market, but not so much benefiting just from the opening of offices in general. So there are two sides to why 2022 is going to see lower tablet growth. So the first is that supply constraints are severely hurting some of the top vendors heading into early 2022. We just saw the fourth quarter earnings come out for the major device vendors, and tablets was not one of the hot topics mentioned as it was earlier in this year and late 2020. It had been touted a lot in earnings prior to this one, and we really didn't see it mentioned among a lot of the vendors this time around. So the market is led, obviously, and growth is largely driven by Apple and its iPad, but even they saw a pretty significant revenue drop in the double digits last quarter. I think it was down 14%. The supply issues are expected to continue throughout the first half of the year in 2022, and so I don't see tablet revenue performing well at Apple or at the industry-wide level during the next few quarters. The second side of the prediction deals with the demand. So there is, according to a lot of these multiple vendors, there's still high demand for tablets, and it's mainly the component shortages and supply issues that are negatively impacting the segment revenue. So due to this demand, we're seeing high backlogs that are going to generate some growth later in the year. In 2022, but I think this growth is still going to be much lower than, like I said, the previous year and a half or so, where we were seeing strong double-digit growth. I think before the end of the year, though, I think in the second half of the year, we will start seeing some positive growth rates from the tablet market as a whole. So it kind of depends on the next couple of quarters how much of a hit the tablet revenue takes by mid-year, to see if total 2022 tablet revenue will decline or slowly grow. My guess right now is we're going to see flat to maybe a slight decline in tablet revenue for the calendar 2022 year. So that wraps up the tablet prediction, and we're going to bounce back now to the PC market, this time particularly around PC services. So we have been seeing a lot of momentum around device as a service, or DaaS, over the last few years since the start of the pandemic. The prediction here is that DaaS is going to lead all PC services in revenue growth through 2022, meaning DaaS is going to be the fastest growing PC services segment for vendors, not the largest by any means in terms of revenue. I just want to make that clear. Support services is still a much larger chunk, although the DaaS business is slowly becoming a significant revenue chunk on its own. So I'm also predicting that this DaaS growth is going to continue to lead PC services in terms of revenue growth over probably the next few years. And this comes as we're seeing an increase in support services and other attached services in correlation with the rebound in the commercial PC market, which obviously continues to stay strong through 4Q21, and like I said, will likely be still a strong market through at least the first half of the year. So TBR has a hardware subscription services market landscape that we published late last year and is a semi-annual publication that includes DaaS revenue estimates and forecasts for all of the major PC vendors. DaaS revenue is expected to reach $6.2 billion by 2024, with a CAGR of 26% among all those vendors covered. This includes higher growth rates in the immediate quarters and years as we are seeing more adoption in the hybrid working environments and in the SMB market in particular. We are seeing stronger growth rates by some of the smaller DaaS vendors while also seeing strong double-digit growth across all of the major PC vendors. In this market landscape, I have HP Inc. as the largest DaaS vendor in terms of revenue at the end of 2021, followed in second place by Dell, and then Lenovo brings up third place with its own rapidly growing DaaS business. So next, I want to quickly go over where I see the DaaS market growing. I'll cover a few trends and growth areas that I see as important for a competitive DaaS offering. So I want to start by saying that while I see strong growth in DaaS this year, adoption and revenue potential has not lived up to initial market expectations if you look back a few years ago to when these vendors originally launched their offerings and how they anticipated growth back then. However, DaaS is rapidly picking up steam throughout the pandemic. It's shifting into new markets like SMB, not just the original customer base of large enterprises. And I think there is strong growth potential over the next few years for this business to continue to expand and easily grow market share. One area I can see as a side growth area for DaaS is Windows 11 release. So the characteristics of Windows 11 or the features, they don't really impact DaaS. It's the timing that could be a factor in 2022. So typically it tends to take the businesses and enterprises about a year or so to adopt a new operating system after it launches. They don't usually immediately sanction a refresh right away. So that's looking at around the late 2022 timeframe where more and more companies are going to have reviewed Windows 11 release, decided on whether or not to begin to upgrade their PCs and kind of strategize to them when the time frame of when to make that jump. So typically typically companies are more likely to buy new PCs rather than have the old fleet re-imaged when with a new operating system like Windows 11. So this opens up potential growth area for DaaS where PC vendors can market the service as an alternative to potential customers that are already deciding on a large refresh already. So what are the major drivers that customers are looking at when considering DaaS? I have outlined a few of the capabilities of DaaS that I think are important as customers look to consider opting into one of these types of contracts. I think having device flexibility is key because if the DaaS offering isn't is an incomplete solution. It loses its appeal, meaning if you only support one vendor's PCs, but the customer still has, I don't know, for example, say some Apple products or some other major PC competitors' devices for people who maybe have a specific preference, or maybe there's some legacy PCs or whatever. If you can't support those, you basically are diminishing the value of the service. So I see being flexible and supportive with all PC brands as an important feature for a DAS offering. Obviously, a vendor is going to prefer its own PCs as the primary units here, but having that extra coverage can be important for some customers. In terms of contract length, I've seen various offerings, but the typical contract length seems to be around 3 to 5 years. Definitely a multi-year contract, but I've seen reduced contract length up to even like 6 months or sometimes 1-year contracts throughout the pandemic. And I know that's to help meet the kind of the challenging environment as offices were opening and closing and whatnot. But I don't think that's the right way to go about it. I think DAS is a one size fits most, and if it doesn't fit you, it's probably not for you type of deal, because shorter contracts do not benefit the DAS model and isn't what the service is supposed to be about. I also think it can be extremely costly for a vendor to have to find a way to do shorter contracts, and ultimately, therefore, not worth the hassle. So overall, I don't think contract length in terms of shortening it makes much sense to do to the DAS offerings or makes it any more appealing. And outside of its typical, like I said, multi-year, whatever it is, 3 to 5 year length contracts. So then we have scalability next, or the ability to scale up and down the number of seats based on a company's need. This was more of a problem a year ago, but it still exists in the changing market environment, and I think it definitely impacts some of these SMB customers as well, which might be ramping up or down employees based on how they were open or closing their facilities. Another important area is pricing. I think having multiple tiers is helping attract more SMBs. This is a market we are seeing strong growth in over the past couple of years. Most of the DAS vendors have introduced new offerings specifically aimed at the SMB market since the beginning of the pandemic, and they're looking to capitalize on these businesses as they look to refresh their PCs and outfit for the hybrid working environments. And then finally, for DAS, we have security. Whether it's endpoint or BIOS level, the DAS service needs to be completely secure for both enterprise customers or SMBs. They're looking for the hardware and software updates to be completely automated and taken care of. Can everybody still hear me? I just heard I cannot be heard. Hopefully you can still hear me. So back to security. Yeah, so I see security overall as a big selling point and attractive option here for DAS offerings moving forward. To wrap up on DAS, I do see steady growth in 2022 and over the next few years, but I think the potential inflection point for this market will not happen for about 5 years. At this point, I expect DAS will be better understood at that time and kind of been more considered by more companies. I expect to see a large number of large enterprises leveraging DAS, along with a lot of the small businesses. And in the meantime, I expect DAS revenue growth to remain in the strong double digits each quarter for the major vendors. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this slide as it's not a specific prediction for 2022, but it's a few other areas where I see the device growth kind of stemming from over the next couple of years, or at least interesting topics that we're keeping an eye on. So PC refreshes are going to naturally happen every 3 to 5 years as companies look to upgrade to newer equipment or newer models. Consumer device life cycle is even a bit longer. As long as the device still works and operates at a decent level, they're probably not going to upgrade it. Looking at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a massive surge in demand for PCs as people and businesses outfitted for shutdowns. So there is still some time before that window of refreshes is due for many customers, still a year or two out at least. However, there are a few drivers that could help accelerate some of the refresh decisions into 2022 or 2023. So one of them is the Windows 11 release. I already kind of touched on this with in general in terms of like the waiting period where companies evaluate the new OS release before committing to a major turnover and refresh of their devices. So this is going to help keep PC unit sales increasing probably around that end of year time frame. And then I'm going to go down a small rabbit hole real quick as I recently saw another possible refresh driver this week concerning kind of security. I saw it in the news. So it concerns Microsoft and in particular its new security processor called the Microsoft Pluton security processor. So I don't know a whole lot about it yet as I was just reading about it the other day. But basically it sounds like if it's effective and if there are significant attacks that it can stop and solve, then it could drive a decent refresh of PCs. So the idea here that Microsoft has is in order to improve security, Windows 11 uses a processor architecture that forces the computer's CPU to interact with a separate TPM or trusted platform module to store like encryption data or any kind of highly sensitive data. So obviously we've seen a huge number of cyber threats and attacks increase over the last couple of years. That I don't think is going away. It's just going to continue to increase. The hackers continue to get smarter and find new ways to kind of attack the current security solutions that we have in place. So I'll start by saying that the TPM architecture is supposed to be known as very secure to begin with, but we are seeing ways where this can be vulnerable, especially between the connection from the CPU and the TPM chip. So what Microsoft did is they have Pluton basically solving this potential threat by having its TPM capabilities built into the actual CPU processor. And so it's basically the new evolved version of past TPM chips. So all in all, if Pluton proves it can improve the security of Windows PCs, and if cyber threats, especially around that, and hacks continue to increase, I could see this as this new security capability kind of helping to play a role in the decision of some companies to upgrade sooner than later to Windows 11. So going slightly out of order, I see PC connectivity, and in particular 5G connectivity, continuing to be a popular feature for certain business users that need a reliable connection on the go. As the 5G network coverages and speeds continue to increase over the next few years, I do expect to see an increase in demand for 5G capable PCs. There are already a ton of 5G capable PCs out there. I don't think the market is quite as big yet as there are the number, but the devices are already there and ready to take on this growth as it comes. I'm not sure exactly at this point how much that will be, but this is an area that we continue to watch. And then moving away from PCs, the smart devices business is also seeing some rapid growth. Whether it's in wearables, smart home, or AR, VR, we're seeing vendors continue to come to market with new solutions and products to drive non-PC revenue in the long term. In particular, I have seen tremendous growth in smart collaboration revenue over the last few quarters from multiple of the major device vendors as a result of the kind of switch to hybrid working. So a lot of new devices and peripherals coming to market from all the big vendors that, whether it be monitors with improved noise cancellation capabilities, better built-in webcams, or new devices for the conference room, including things like smart speakers or cameras, to like actual devices or kind of like general hub devices to help manage all these other devices to help simplify the meeting room and collaboration process. And then the major point here is that, well, PCs will continue to be the largest device in terms of revenue for the Dells, HPs, and Lenovo's. The non-PC revenue streams are getting increased focus, increased investment, and we're seeing a lot of new products being brought to market and expect a lot more over the course of the year. As the PC growth rate decelerates, these vendors are going to continue to look elsewhere to help drive growth in other areas outside of just general PC hardware. And then just a quick wrap up on just kind of summarizing the outlook for the market. So the short term, meaning 2022, we're going to see component shortages go away. This will lead to some of the huge backlogs drying up in the following quarters. The result, I think, will have device vendors growing revenue faster in the first half of this year than in the second half of 2022. But overall, I do still think that 2022 device revenue is going to increase year to year. And in the longer term, meaning 2023, 24, and even beyond that, it's obviously harder to predict. But I think growth levels are going to return closer to pre-pandemic levels. I think this means the PC market will, like I said, be closer in the single-digit growth range. The tablet market is going to be flat or declining long-term after this pandemic burst in demand. I know it's declining for some vendors right now, but there's still a big demand due to supply. So once the supply meets the demand, I think it's just going to start seeing generally flat to declining levels again. Within smart devices, this is definitely going to continue to grow in the double digits over the next few years in all the areas I listed on the last slide. I mean, definitely in PC services, I see pretty significant growth in, like I said, in DAS, but also for the short term, at least, definitely in support services as well. And then there are going to be refresh opportunities, like I talked about earlier, where device growth will stem from longer term. Though I think price competition is going to be a lot higher than it is now. It's going to lead to a much more competitive environment, and that's going to impact these vendors' margins and average selling prices. And just to jump quickly, I just wanted to mention we have a variety of related reports, benchmarks, and market landscapes that pertain to what we've talked about today on the Devices webinar. This includes our quarterly devices and platforms benchmark that comes out after all the companies report their each quarter's results. And then also we have that hardware subscription services market landscape that I mentioned earlier, with the next iteration set to come out, I think, towards the end of April. So with that, I'm going to open up to any questions, and definitely feel free to reach out afterwards by email as well if you have any additional questions. Okay, looks like we have one on, will we see any growth in the adoption of mobile connectivity over Wi-Fi with the cost of data decreasing? I don't foresee this being a big growth driver in the short term, possibly in the longer term. It's hard to say. I mean, they'll have to find a better way to package up the data plans in order to see a large scale adoption of mobile connectivity, assuming you're talking about PCs there. There's always going to be use cases with certain business people that are always traveling and such, but in terms of the typical business user or definitely like the consumer, that I don't foresee that as a major growth driver there. Okay, everyone, please feel free to reach out to the team with any follow-up questions. If you have a few moments, it would be greatly appreciated if you could please fill out the survey on your screen. A replay version of the webcast will be available after the event and will be sent out to you via email. To view a list of our upcoming and past webinars, please visit tbri.com and be sure to join us on Thursday, March 10th, that's next week, for our 2022 predictions cloud practice. Thank you and have a great day.